MacNutt, who has done extensive work on Francis Marion, is a great friend of SCG 50.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me back there? People ask me how a lady from Boston happens to become an expert on Georgetown, South Carolina, to the fact that Charles Bagsley, Miss Charles, asked me to write a tour guide for the Rebel War in Georgetown, South Carolina. And the simple answer is, I was introduced to General Marion by Walt Disney and became a great follower of him and his brigade. All of that caused me to do a lot of research into the area, and I noticed that there was a lot of misunderstandings about what happened at Georgetown. I became very interested in Georgetown, and I will talk to you a little bit about some of the errors that people talk about in history in Georgetown, a little bit about Marion. We've had a number of really great presenters here this weekend, and some of them have already addressed some of the issues I was going to talk about. I'll try not to be repetitive. Our tour guide is going to have 15 locations to visit in the town itself, and 12 just immediately outside of the town, and a little bit too far to walk to, maybe 2, 3, 4 miles outside of the town. So it should be interesting. When I was asked to do this, I forget whether it was Heather or Molly I talked to, and I needed an idea of what is it that you want to have in this guidebook. And I was told, well, we'd like to have you do a diagram so people can do a terrain walk of the fighting areas. And I said, you mean the Walmart parking lot? Because the town, when Marion was alive, was a lot smaller than it is now. It is kind of spread out. And one of the major fighting areas actually did take place in and about the Walmart parking lot. Now, Georgetown was laid out in the early 1730s. This is basically a speculator's idea of what the town should look like. It didn't really, except for the streets, turn out that way. But it's very interesting. You have each street has, well, the front of the street, which is on the water, is laid out differently. This is laid out for commercial purposes. But the residential areas have 4 lots per block. Each lot is 50 feet wide, and each lot is 217 feet in length, which means any map you see of the Georgetown area, you have a built-in scale, because you can use the lots to judge distance. This plan for the historic district is still evident in the streets laid out in Georgetown today, and it makes it so that you can really kind of visualize what's going on, because when you walk around, you're walking around basically in a colonial town laid out in the early colonial era. Now, at the time of the Revolution, I'm not going to stand a little aside here so I can do this right. At the time of the Revolution, there were only 2 roads into Georgetown. Get used to this stupid. 2 roads into Georgetown. Here we go. One was the Black River Road, which comes out here and ends at Wood Street. When it goes up here, it becomes Route 701. And the other is 17 Alternate, which is High Market Street, which comes down here. Those are the only ways of getting into Georgetown other than by water. The other thing is, as we talk, you have to realize they will talk about the island opposite Georgetown. Harry Lee will talk about it, James will talk about it during one of the raids that Marion and Lee did. And I always thought, I always thought that it was here we go. I always thought it was this, because that's an island opposite Georgetown. Well, here's where history is important, and that is in the 19th century, they cut this canal for shipping. So in the Rebel War era, this was a peninsula, it was not an island. So that's not the island that they talk about in the assault on Georgetown. Over here is the island. Right? Now, the first bridge over the Great Dee River in the Georgetown area was built in 1937 or thereabouts. It's been replaced by the current bridge. The old bridge has been left as a lookout or a fishing bridge. And if you get a chance, beautiful view of the river, you should go down there and look at it. Why is it significant? Well, another place that's mentioned in the reports about the attacks on Georgetown is Mitchell's Landing. And this was another place I spent many hours agonizing over. Where's Mitchell's Landing? Where's Mitchell's Landing? Well, Mitchell's Landing was the landing for Thomas Mitchell's plantation. And that plantation ran like this. So the bridge, the old bridge, is about where Mitchell's Landing was. Now, as we go on, there'll be more on that to help you understand what's going on. Georgetown was surrounded by rice fields. It was almost an island in the way it's laid out. Now, people have said, some writers have said, Marion attacked Georgetown so many times because it was his boyhood home, and he had this nostalgic, well, there's nothing nostalgic about Marion. He was a professional, hard-nosed soldier, as some of the earlier speakers have talked about. Marion was interested in Georgetown for the same reason Greene was, the same reason Lee was. Georgetown had tremendous strategic importance. This map by J.D. Lewis is actually helps us to understand that. Georgetown was the center of a road network. Whoops. Keep doing that. All right. So you center of a node, yeah. All right, so you have the north-south Kings Highway. Charlestown goes all the way up through Georgetown to Wilmington. You can go all the way up to Draw, to the Fall Line Road, which is part of the Great Wagon Road that goes all the way north. You can go down to Monk's Corner. You can go up to King Street in Williamsburg. You can go up to Nelson's Ferry. You can, by that, go all the way up to Camden. So it's a network of roads. All right. The problem is roads were horrible in those days. Not a good way to move stuff if you could do it some other way. Georgetown is also the center of a river network, and that's almost more important because you can move heavy things on the river. So what rivers do we have? We have the Sandpit River, we have the Wacamo River, we have the Black River, and probably most important, we have the Great PD River that goes all the way up into North Carolina. And as the British take Georgetown, they use this river to supply loyalists who are up in this area. So that river is important to the British for that reason, but also down that river comes rice, comes tar and pitch and indigo, and lumber for shipbuilding, and lumber for doing other things. In Georgetown itself, we have vats, or just outside Georgetown, we have vats for evaporating seawater to make salt. Salt is essential for life in the South, and in this time period, it's how people preserve meat. Salt's incredibly important. So Georgetown has all of that to offer to somebody who takes Georgetown. So it is in essence what railheads and airports will become in later wars. It is a doorway to the outside. It is too shallow for ships of the war, the big man of wars that Britain has, but it takes all the coastal vessels and most of the cross-transatlantic trade vessels can go into Georgetown Harbor. So that's why Georgetown is important. Well, we'll talk a little bit about the Marion family. Before I do that, one other thing. Professional soldiers will tell you that amateurs talk about tactics and professional soldiers talk about logistics. Logistics is men, material, food, ammunition getting to the war zone. Napoleon said an army travels on its stomach, and that's quite right. Sumter was always interested in making a grand stroke. So he gathers men all together, this grand stroke. Marion was a logistics guy. He knew if he could prevent the British from recruiting, if he could stop their supplies, he could frustrate their purposes. So one of the things he did that was different from what Sumter did, with a very small number of men that he had, he broke them up into patrols, and he did very heavy patrolling all throughout this area to the point where Rowden would say, he couldn't get a messenger up to Camden without an escort of less than 400 men. So Marion was doing a very different type of tactic, and that tactic was dependent upon control of the roads and also the waterways, as we heard earlier, in and out of Georgetown. All right, so what about the Marion family? Marion was born. He was born in 1832. This is one of the John Blake White sweet potato pictures. He did about 5 of them. And he is the only artist who drew Marion, who ever saw Marion. He was actually one of Marion's neighbors. When this picture was originally published and shown in Charleston, people who were still alive who knew Marion said it was a good likeness. The other portrait here is of Buddy, or Oscar. And there's a contemporary account that says that that was a good portrait of Oscar. I personally believe this is Paul. And each of the renditions of this picture paint the horse with the same markings. So I think that's what Paul actually looked like. I would point out 2 other people. We have a Catawba warrior here, and we have a woodsman here, and you can see their brothers in arms. So Marion's unit, as shown by this picture, was a force of many different people from many different ethnicities, all working together for the same end. So, as I said, Marion was born in 1832. He was born on the Cooper River. He had a sister, Esther, brother Benjamin, Isaac, Gabriel, and Joe. 1838, Dad moves to Georgetown. Marion's about 6, can you hear me?
17 of the 32.
What did I say?
18.
Oh, well, 100 years off, yes, 17, thank you. 1732, he's born. 1738, family moves to Georgetown. Marion basically lived in Georgetown between the age of 6 and roughly 23, when he and his brother Gabriel moved out to the Santee up around Utah Springs. Now, sometimes, the first time I went to Georgetown, I said, well, where did Marion live? You claimed him as your favorite son. Where did he live? And I was told, oh, the Belle Isle plantation out by the golf course, out by Battery White. No, that was never Marion land. That was owned by the Borgie family. And apparently they've confused that with the Belle Isle plantation from the Santee. It was owned by Marion's brother Gabriel. Marion had a sister, Esther. Okay. And this structure, which is the plantation kitchen of the Greenwich Plantation, is the only structure still standing in Georgetown owned by a member of the Marion family. The sister married first John Alston, very wealthy guy. She had 6 children by him, 4 who died in childbirth, 2 who lived to be an adult. When Alston wrote his will in 1750, he said that he left the right to live in his townhouse in Georgetown to his mother-in-law, Esther Marion, who was the general's mother. So chances are the general also lived in that townhouse that was on Prince Street and Broad Street. When Esther died, the property was to go to Alston's wife, also Esther Marion, and on her death or remarriage to his daughters. Now, men frequently wrote in this provision about if you remarry lady, you don't get the estate. And the reason they did that is when a woman married, everything she owned, down to her socks, became the property of her husband. And he could squander it if he wanted, and she could do nothing about it. That would mean that the children by the first husband would be disinherited. So there was generally this provision, if you get remarried, you're out of the will. And that's what was done here. Now, Esther didn't stay single very long. She married Thomas Mitchell. He another wealthy guy. She had 6 more kids. 4 lived to be adults. 2 of the gentlemen ended up serving with their uncle, Francis Marion, in the swamps. 1 of the daughters married a guy from the north, had some grandchildren, and is a grandmother to Julia Ward Howe, who wrote The Battlefield of the Republic. So that family got around. They owned the Greenwich Plantation House and that whole estate. Benjamin Marion, his brother, also married in Alston, also married a wealthy lady. He had a plantation outside of Georgetown. He was the wealthiest of the brothers. He died after the war began, but before Charleston was occupied. He loaned the state of South Carolina for the war effort 23,000 pounds. In today's money, that would be about $6 million. So even although he didn't have the military honors that his younger brother had, he certainly was a supporter. Gabriel had a townhouse in Georgetown, also on Prince Street. He married well, moved out. His brother bought that townhouse, brother Joe, that townhouse in Georgetown. Joe, however, married a Gilliard, and the Gilliards were all rabid Tories. So it must have made some unusual family arguments. The last brother, who was the only one of General Marion's brothers who was alive at the time of the occupation, was Isaac Marion. Isaac had a reputation of being a bully, bad-tempered, hot-tempered, nasty, unlikable person who also happened to be the Justice of the Peace. Now, how his temperament qualified him to be Justice of the Peace, I don't know, but he was. He married Rebecca Alston. Her father had provided her with a townhouse on High Market Street for her life. They had 2 children, both women. Rebecca's father gave Isaac a 500-acre plantation up, was it Brook Green? Have I got that correct, where the gardens are? Isaac sold it, and he ran a tavern called the Boundary House up on the North Carolina boundary. It was to the Boundary House that the Committee of Correspondence of the Sons of Liberty in Massachusetts, care of Isaac Marion, which meant he was a member of that secret organization, forwarded the information on the Battle of Concord and Lexington. Over here we have a replica of the Sons of Liberty medal. If you get a chance to come up and look at it. Isaac was in Little River, that's where his tavern was, and that letter from the Committee of Correspondence was then forwarded and dispersed throughout South Carolina. Isaac was in Little River when the British captured Georgetown. They then moved up the coast. They took Little River, they built a blockhouse there, and Isaac it was implied that he should go to Georgetown for his health. And so he moved in to Rebecca's house on High Market Street in Georgetown. He had a number of unfortunate incidents. In one instance, the British commander grabbed Isaac, and according to local tradition, he was placed on a horse backwards and rode around town, being asked, "Where is Francis Marion?" And Isaac said, "I don't know, but you're going to hear from him soon." He couldn't have disclosed Marion's location if he wanted to, because the general never told anybody where he was going. Riding the horse, however, it may not have been a flesh and blood horse. Riding the horse was a well-known punishment in the British Army for people who were drunks, brawlers, and that sort of stuff. And it consisted of a very large sawhorse that was so large the person sitting on it, their feet wouldn't touch the ground. The person was made to sit on the edge of the plank with a weight on his leg. If that's the type of horse poor Isaac was made to ride for a number of hours, it was a form of torture. Isaac never told on his brother, and eventually the British let him go. The town was scandalized because Isaac still held the King's Commission as being the Justice of the Peace at the time. The other thing that occurred to Isaac was after the British came back from a raid, they came by his house, they broke into the house, they trashed the house, and poor Rebecca had a portrait of her mother there that they bayoneted and cut. Now, is that true? Yes, because I've seen a picture of the painting. It was written up in one of the antique books in the 1960s. It was in existence then, probably still is now. So that was poor Isaac. He died 2 days after General Marion recaptured Georgetown. So that made the capture of the city kind of bittersweet. So I'm going to point out the locations for a moment. you have, this is the house where the general's mother had the life estate. This is Gabriel's townhouse. This is the cookhouse or the kitchen for Greenwich Plantation. Plantation line kind of ran like this. This is Isaac Marion's house with Rebecca. And you know what they say in real estate? Location, location, location. Bad location. Right next to Isaac's house is the British Hospital. So that was not a good location. All right. Moving right along. We're going to talk a little bit about the war. It spells war. I'm not good at spelling it. All right. So, war comes to Georgetown. They're patriotic. They form militias. Let's diverse for just a minute. People have used terms such as militias, provincials, state troops, continentals, and I'm sure 90% of you know what that means. But for the 20% who don't, I'm going to do a quick expose on that. If you were a male between 16 and 45, white male, you were liable to be called for militia duty. This was a draft. You did not have a choice to go when you were called. And you would generally serve for 6 months and locally, and you would be trained twice a year for maybe an afternoon on the local drill field where they'll teach you how to shoulder your musket and how to go left face, right face, about face. And that was about the size of it. So these guys weren't trained very well. The fact that they ran in the face of British infantry coming at them with bayonets, when they did not have bayonets for the most part, and they were not trained to use bayonets for the most part, is not a big surprise. You have one shot, and you have this guy with a great big long sticker coming at you, and it'd be tough for you to stand there. Provincials, okay? Provincials and state troops are very similar. When the state was under royal control, if you had a need to raise men and you wanted more than militia, you would form a provincial regiment, and these guys were trained to the same standards as British soldiers, but they would serve for the war. It wasn't a 6-month guy, they would serve for the war, and they were pretty professional at many times. The provincials that we've talked about here, many of them had seen many battles in the north, and they were as professional as the regular British Army. State troops was the same thing as the provincial troops, except those were raised by the Patriots. And most of the state troops were incorporated into the Continental Army, which was the general army that served for either the duration of the war or for a fixed period of years. So that's kind of the level of soldiers. Because after Savannah and after Sheldon, the Continental Army had been, in the South, had been shrunk because of the number of casualties. There were a fair number of people who had trained as Continental soldiers in amongst the civilian population, but not serving in any unit. And many of these people made up the core of Marion's brigade when he started fighting. All right, so we start the war. The local militia does their thing. The town decides that they should build a fort, Fort Wynia, to protect the bay. It's way down here in Morgan Park today. It's a very pretty place. In the Revolution, it was a rice field filled with mosquitoes and stinking water. It was not a nice place to serve. But today it's very pretty if you go down there, and it's well worth the trip. That fort never fired a shot in anger at anybody. Okay. So the next event that happens, Lafayette arrives in 1777. He comes ashore with Baron de Cobb. I'm not going to dwell on that. Somebody else has talked about that. But I will say that when he arrived with a shipload of munitions that he brought for the Continental Army. I would say one other thing. He was a 4-year veteran of the French Army, professionally trained. He was 19 years old. And he became a major general in the American Army. He fought valiantly, he was wounded, he returned the fight, he fought the whole duration of the rest of the war. And today, we don't want 19-year-olds to have a rifle. And there's something, I think, wrong with that. People shouldn't be perpetual children until they're 25. People need to have responsibility. And to say that you can't unless you're, 35 is crazy, because somebody like Lafayette couldn't exist today, and in the revolutionary times there were great heroes and very professional and good people. All right. July 1st, 1780, Captain Ardenzoff of the Royal Navy sails into Georgetown with no opposition at all. Charleston's fallen, Ardenzoff comes in, takes over the city, no opposition. Everybody's falling all over themselves to come and say, oh, we'll be good loyalists, we'll be good, just be nice to us, we'll be good subjects. The British take this tavern, which was at the corner of Front Street and Broad Street. It no longer exists. This became their administrative headquarters. They then take this building on Broad Street to be the commander's living quarters. And opposite this building was the muster ground where the soldiers had to go every morning to be counted to make sure they hadn't deserted. And also where, in case of an alarm, they were supposed to report so they could be assigned to where they needed to go. They took this building. Originally, the door, the porch was on the street side. This is their hospital. Over here, in this house that you can barely see, that's where Rebecca Alston, Marion, and Isaac Marion lived. The Marion house no longer exists. This is a relatively modern house, but it gives you some idea of how close poor Isaac was living to the British hospital. They took over the church. They made it into a stable. They also probably had supplies in there. They took over a number of private residences. This was one thing the British Army did all the time. The Army would move into your community, and you would be assigned one or more soldiers to quarter in your home. You had to feed that soldier, and nobody would pay you for it. So this was one of the houses where soldiers were quartered. This particular house has a ghost, because they say when Marion raided at one time, the soldier who was on the 3rd floor ran down the stairs, tripped, and broke his neck, and died instantly. And the ghost in this house is said to inhabit the stairwell and tries to prevent other people from falling down the stairs. So he's a friendly ghost. All right. In March, on July 8th, Major Weems comes in and he takes over for Ardenzoff, and Ardenzoff leaves. I'll tell you in a minute why that's significant. Weems comes, he's ordered to build a fort, and he's ordered to form a loyalist militia. Now, between the time July 1st and July 8th, the people of Williamsburg gets this proclamation from Clinton. Now, they had been at Charlestown, they had surrendered the militia, and they had been told, you go home, just promise don't fight again, be nice little people, grow your crops, take care of your family, and you will be unmolested. Clinton says, well, the war's going good down here, and everybody's happy. I'm gonna pardon everybody. So all you guys, you're all pardoned. And now you're good soldiers of the king. You're good citizens of the king. Oh, wait a minute. That also means you're good soldiers of the king, because when we call upon you for militia duty, you have to show up and fight for the royal standard. Now, the people of Williamsburg didn't like that, because they said, that's not what we promised to do. So they picked Major John James to come down to Georgetown to find out. Oh, one more place. This was the warehouse that they came in and brought all their stuff into. Okay, there we go. Back to the commander's house. So James comes down to talk to Ardenzoff in his quarters where he lives. And the accounts I'm going by are written by the Williamsburg Church and by William Dobbin James, who had first-hand knowledge of what James was telling people. And basically, James starts to talk to Ardenzoff. The minute he says the word "I represent," the British naval officer gets very angry, and the conversation goes downhill very quickly. And there's all sorts of threats made. Ardenzoff draws his sword, and James is now getting a little terrified. He picks up the chair he's sitting on. It's sort of like the lion tamer. He's kind of holding Arkansas at bay, and he gradually backs away. He backs out the rear door, gets on his horse, rides off, and goes back to Williamsburg and reports what's happened. The people of Williamsburg say, if we're going to fight, we're going to fight for our country. We're not going to fight for Great Britain. And as you were told earlier, they send to Gates for a regular Continental officer to come down and train them so they could fight effectively. And of course, it's Francis Marion that shows up. And as was stated earlier, he had no command authority over them. He could say, I think it's a good idea that we do blah, blah, blah. Although he probably wouldn't have said that. He said, let's do this. But if he didn't do it, he couldn't punish them. The most he could do is say, get out of camp. He couldn't punish somebody. But he had a way of leading that people wanted to follow him. And I think the people of Williamsburg knew, those who knew him from Charlestown, who knew him from earlier campaigns, knew that he was one hard-nosed guy. And he was tough, and he knew what he was doing. And they probably said to themselves, that's just what we need here. We need somebody who knows what they're doing, who's hard-nosed, and he'll take care of us. And he did. First thing he said is, put a feather, white feather in your caps, so that will be your uniform. Because they didn't have uniforms. That way you could tell who's a friend and who's a foe when you hit the battlefield. He almost immediately split them up into patrols to start patrolling in the area around Georgetown, and did a number of raids, which have been talked about earlier. I won't talk about them again. But as a result of those raids, Weems was told by Cornwallis, get this Mr. Marion. They wouldn't give him a rank at this time. Get Mr. Marion. And Weems went out and he did his best. And he came back on September 20th and he wrote to General Cornwallis, quote, I have done everything in my power to get at Mr. Marion. Although I never could come up with them, yet I punished them so hard as in great measure to break them up. And what he did was he destroyed what was a 70-mile swath of total destruction through South Carolina. That was September 20th. Now, Weems has broken up Marion, and in doing that, he leaves, when he goes off after Marion, he leaves Georgetown in the control of the newly recruited Loyalist militia. That, they can take care of a city that's got a fort in it, On September 28th, 29th, 9 days after Marion's been broken up by Weems, Marion attacks and took the British post at Dollar's Tavern at Black Window Creek. He takes all the equipment, he breaks up the recruiting, disperses the Loyalists who are gathering there, and the Loyalist militia in Georgetown, hearing that, immediately abandoned their post and go home. As a result, the British in Charleston had to send a galley with a cannon on it, like that one over there, and they sent regular troops who were probably Loyalist provincial troops from up north. There were two very well-known Loyalist provincial troops that came down. The Queen's Rangers that had originally been established by Rogers Rangers, they were wearing green, and the King's Rangers who were wearing red. But then they'll talk about them as the British troops, the British regulars, but these are actually American Loyalists that come down. But they are well-trained. They go down and take over the fort. On October 8th, which is not that much later, Marion starts an actual attack against the town. And what he does is, as I said, there are only two ways into Charlestown. One comes to Georgetown, where one is the High Market Street, the other is the Black River Road, comes down this way into town. Marion sets up a camp at a place called Camp Bay, and that's up in this area. Bay is a feature of geography in South Carolina, which is a depression in the earth, and there's different theories as to how they occurred. Some say they were meteor strikes, some say it was the glaciers. But in any event, these are generally swampy areas. Marion's position here is a mile and a half from both of those key roads, so he controls the roads coming in and out of Georgetown. He basically has the town under siege. He starts sending his men down these roads, and this is where a series of very vicious short-lived skirmishes take place between Marion's cavalry and the Loyalist cavalry. And this is one of the better-known incidents. Marion's troops run into Major Gainey of the Loyalist militia. There's a sharp fight about where Walmart is, and the Loyalists give way. Gainey is rushing back towards the fort. Sergeant Alan McDonald of Marion's brigade has singled out Gainey. He's chasing him. The horses are running like crazy. Gainey is gradually pulling away. Gainey has about a minute and a half before he'll be under the guns of the British fort and be protected. McDonald knows that. He doesn't want to lose his prey. He drops his reins. He lifts his musket up over his head, and he lunges forward with the musket, and he skews Gainey in the back. The bayonet comes off. Gainey pulls ahead. He makes the fort, bleeding profusely, and the bayonet kind of waving in the wind behind him. Marion and a lot of other people thought that that was the end of Gainey, but he actually recovered from that wound, and we'll hear from him again later. There's a marker there. This marker is on Route 701, and it's on the property of the municipal building on 701, just outside of Georgetown proper, between that and the Walmart. It says here, Major McDonald, Chester McDonald bayoneted the fleeing Major Gainey, following the Tories, yada, yada, yada. It's the wrong date. It was October 13th, not January. And that Marion then continues on into Georgetown. He surrounds the fort. He demands, all the Loyalists who barricaded themselves in the fort, Marion demands they surrender. They won't come out and fight, and they won't, you know. They're all tied up there. So Marion takes their horses. He takes all the military equipment he can carry easily, and he parades his troops to the town to show, see, I'm here, and they can't do anything about it. Parades up and down, and then he leaves because he knows there's a relief force coming. When he writes his report to General Gates, he explains what happened, and he says that the loyalists there in the fort are in the, quote, greatest terror imaginable as a result of this raid. And once again, they all desert and leave Georgetown basically undefended. Once again, the relieving troops, who are regular troops, re-garrison the post. The next time Marion attacks Georgetown is in November 15th. And again, there's this fierce cavalry battle of small units. And this takes place this time on High Market Street near a place called White's Bridge. And unfortunately for Marion, his nephew is in one of the parties, is unhorsed. And as this monument will say, after the Gabriel Marion, the general's nephew, is unhorsed, he's taken prisoner, he's beaten severely, and when his name is spoken, he's immediately shot and killed. Marion, who is said to have seldom showed emotion, when he learned of this incident, cried. And this was a tough thing for him. He stolidly reports to Gates on this thing that our loss was Lieutenant Gabriel Marion and 1 private killed and 3 wounded. Once again, he gets up to Georgetown. He doesn't have artillery. They're all locked up in the fort. There's not much he can do. So he leaves. So if you came out 17A, there's a street called White Bridge Drive, right here. It's a little dinky street, hard to see. It's across from this Georgetown Auto and Marine, and the monument is right here. It's on White Bridge Drive, not on 17. It makes it a little hard to see. If you go by the Dollar General, you've gone too far. The creek is up here. It now goes under the road, under a culvert. So the next time Marion comes to Georgetown, he's no longer a colonel in January or December, late December, early January. He becomes a brigadier general of militia. He now has legal control over the men serving under him. And so he joins up with Lee's Legion, as stated. And Lee, who who with Green have already discussed they want to take Georgetown. They join up and they have this plan to float 90 militiamen, infantry, down the Great PD River, which is what this is, and they're going to go to the island opposite Georgetown. They do this at night. They're going to spend the night on the island. That's the island. And in the next night, they're going to cross over at Mitchell's Landing, and we talked about that earlier. There's the terminus of the bridge. And today, we'll be up in this area here, and they come across the fields, the rice fields, and they follow the dikes and the rice fields down. They come around and they come into the town through the wharf area because they feel the British won't protect that. They feel it's safe, so there's nobody down there looking for them. And they come up, and the plan is for two groups. One group is to seize the commandant and to take care of any soldiers who show up at the muster point. And the other group is to position themselves between the fort and the town to take care of any soldiers that try to gain the fort. And then Marion and Lee will come down by horseback. As soon as they hear the fighting, they'll burst into the town and they'll clean up any resistance. Well, let's say the best laid plans of mice and men, it didn't work that way. So this is the commandant's house, and I am going to read you a first-hand account because there's absolutely no way I can write it or say it any better. This is Peter Oree, and although it's in Parson Weems' book, I have read enough first-hand reports from veterans to feel 98% sure that this is accurate, because this is what the things that veterans remember. The infantry, he writes, the infantry arrived at the appointed moment and, dreading the dangers of delay, charged at once into the town, which they found utterly unprepared for the attack. Colonel Campbell, the commander, was made prisoner in his bed. Adjutant Cruikshank, Major Irwin, and other officers were sound asleep in a tavern belonging to a genteel family with whom they spent the evening with great hilarity. I can't tell you how many times in the National Guard people went off with great hilarity to the tavern. So that's perfectly in keeping with what you'd expect. Okay. A detachment of our men approached the house and surrounded it. Now I want to say this house fits the description best of any house still standing in Georgetown. I can't say that it is the house, we have no proof, but it's in the right location. Its description is very consistent with the story. All right. A detachment of our men approached the house and surrounded it. As soon as the alarm was given, the officers leaped out of bed and, not waiting to dress, flew into the piazza, flourishing their pistols and shouting to the charge. Major Irwin, with more courage than discretion, fired a pistol and would have tried another, but just as he had cocked it, he was stopped short by the stroke of a bayonet, which ended him and his courage altogether. Adjutant Cruikshank, acting in the same heroic style, would have shared the same fate had it not been for an angel of a young woman, daughter of the gentleman of the house. This charming girl was engaged to be married to Cruikshank's. Waked by the fire and horrible dinner battle in the piazza, she was at first almost bereft of her senses by fright. But the moment she heard her lover's voice, all her terrors vanished, and instead of hiding herself under the bed sheets, she rushed into the piazza amidst the mortal foray with no armor but her love, and no covering but her flowing tresses. Happily for her lover, she got to him just in time to throw her arms around his neck and screamed out, "Oh, save! Save Major Cruikshank!" Thus, with her own sweet body shielding him against the uplifted swords of her enraged countrymen, Cruikshank yielded himself our prisoner, but we paroled him on the spot and left him to those delicious sentiments which he must have felt in the arms of an elegant young woman who had just saved his life. The eyes of all, even the poorest soldiers in our camp, sparkled with pleasure whenever they talked, as they often did, of this charming woman. And to this day, even after a lapse of 30 years, I never think of it but with pleasure. A pleasure as exquisite, perhaps, as what I felt at that first moment of that transaction. So, a bunch of guys out in the woods and a naked lady, so. It wasn't all of them.
Bizarre.
Yeah. As an aside, I diligently looked to see if Crookshanks ever married anybody or ever posted bonds, and he never did. So he was not, he did not make an honest lady, the poor girl. Just as a further aside, I did find, quite frankly, on the question of the sweet potato picture, I did find evidence that an officer at Georgetown had resigned his commission and actually went back to Great Britain. But I can't say for certain that was connected to sweet potato, but it is of some interest, shall we say. On May 28th, Marion again appears before Georgetown. This time he comes as the person who has conquered Fort Mott and Fort Watson. He doesn't come in secret. He comes and he starts digging ditches. He's going to do a formal siege, and he has the knowledge of engineering to do it. The British commander has been advised. One of the big things about Georgetown was the Brits always thought if Cornwallis has to retreat from North Carolina, he might come down the road from Wilmington, and that Georgetown would be critical in that case. But Cornwallis hasn't done that. He's not going to do that. So the commanders in Charlestown tell the commander in Georgetown, if you really get pressed, don't get caught up there in the post. And that's exactly what they do in the middle of the night. They take their cannons. They had 4 cannons. They had 3 9-pound cannons and 1 swivel gun. They spike. That means basically they literally take a spike and they grade it down the touch hole of the cannon so you can't fire the gun. And in this case, they also broke off the trunnions. Now, the trunnions are the 2 little wings on the cannon that sit on the carriage. And once those trunnions are gone, the cannon is nothing but a big paperweight. There's no way you can really replace that. So that's what they do. They steal off in the middle of the night and they sail away. And Marion enters the town the next day. As I said earlier, 2 days later, his brother dies, which kind of sours the thing. Marion immediately puts his men to work to totally demolish all the British works, and it takes them a couple of weeks to do that. Now, the next date of any importance, August 10th, a privateer shows up in front of Georgetown. There's some dispute between the people and the captain of the ship. The captain of the ship sends some men ashore. They set the waterfront fire for all the warehouses, and it spreads to the town. 42 buildings are destroyed. Marion, however, as soon as he took Georgetown, removed all the military supplies up the Black River, so there were no military supplies in the town at that time. The town, however, keeps open commerce now, and so we have privateers coming in selling their goods. The country folks can sell their crops. Ships start arriving from all over the world, so there's a lot of commerce running through Georgetown almost as soon as Marion takes the town, and this is all for the benefit of the Continental Army. One other thing happens on July 17th, the Loyalists, who no longer have Georgetown to supply them, the Loyalists who are up in the area where Marion is today, they ask for a truce, and then a little while later, Major Gainey, who's up in that area, surrenders 500 Loyalists, most of whom take the oath of allegiance to South Carolina, including Gainey, same guy that bayoneted, and he actually ends up serving as a private in Marion's brigade at the end of the war. All right. So the next question is, where was this fort? Okay, and we looked for it for a long while, and the key to locating it was actually in Marion's first account to Gates, his first attempt against Georgetown, in which he says the fort was built around the jail. Now, fortunately, in the Georgetown Museum, Catherine Richardson had written an article on the jails of Georgetown. There were 3 of them, and she locates the jail as being in the first ones, being in the corner of Broad Street and Duke Street. Oops. And that would be up here. The jail and the courthouse is up here. I'm assuming, I think it's a good assumption, that the jail is further away from the town than the courthouse, because most people don't like jails in their backyard. particularly since the jail would have had a gallows and the powder magazine would have been between the jail and the courthouse. We don't know what either of those look like. There is no record of what the fort looked like, but we can make some assumptions. So this picture should be familiar to, yeah, this is St. Andrews, New Brunswick. Okay? And St. Andrews, New Brunswick was founded by loyalists, a lot of them coming from the South, South Carolina, and this is their colonial jail and courthouse. That's what colonial jails look like. Now the one in Georgetown was made of brick. This one's made of stone, but they all are kind of the same. And then the courthouses would be made of wood. Okay, going back to this picture. Based upon the Richardson manuscript, I went to the State Archives and I found this plan of Georgetown. And interestingly enough, these two little buildings here are located. The only other buildings they locate here is the band, which is down here, and the townhouse, which is here. This is the jail and courthouse. Very interesting, something that is a dotted line. All right? It's exactly 200 yards from the corner of that first building. And that's about how far you would have a defensive line out. Now the British didn't invent forts, but they built them to standards. And this is a letter from Patrick Ferguson on how to fortify a house. And you will note the wall and the ditch and this stuff here, which is kind of like antique barbed wires, brush, but it could be what they call abati. The walls were 8 to 12 feet tall. And they frequently had these, what do they call them? The sharpened sticks that come down. I think the name. Abatis, I guess, yeah, they come down. This is a plan of how to build a fort for 120 men. This would have been a plan they would look at. The long and the short of it is that with all of this, that the Shemay would have been used to block roads and temporary problems to prevent people from charging in. Lee says that except for the fort, the outer works were designed to prevent surprise more than a determined assault. The 9-pound cannons would have looked like this. This is the VFW in Georgetown. And this cannon is interesting because it's missing a trunnion. There's one trunnion, there's the other trunnion, it's gone. You can see where it's been beaten off. That takes a lot of work. And it would only be done if the gun was still serviceable. You wouldn't do it to an antique gun, you'd only do it to a gun that's serviceable. And you note the heavy pockmarking on the gun, the rust, which is actually something that shows up with the gun that's been buried in the dirt. We don't know where this gun came from. The Post says it came from the Civil War battery at Battery White, but it's much too old to have been used in the Civil War. So we're still researching this gun. But it is of the type that the British used on their fort. And being a soldier and having worked, how many of you were in the military? Okay. So you're told you got to fill in a ditch. And you got this big piece of iron that's not good for anything. Yeah, that's right. What do you do with it? Into the ditch and fill up the ditch. So since these were over 1,000 pounds, I am quite sure that someplace in Georgetown there are 3 cannons underground unless somebody says they found them. And they would mark the boundaries of the fort if they were find them. Anybody got a big metal detector? So that's the gun. All right. Georgetown was not as big as the layout. This is a Mills map. This is after 1800. Not all the streets were occupied by buildings. I did this map. A lot of help from Muff Boyd from the Georgetown Historical Society. The pink areas are places that we are pretty sure they were structures. Okay? There are undoubtedly structures all in here, but we had no records. So we can't say undoubtedly. The yellow up here, we're very sure that there was nothing on those lots. This is Church Street. There's buildings up here now, but this was all open. I feel pretty certain that there was nothing here, there was nothing here, there was nothing here. We know there was nothing here. We know there was nothing here, there's nothing here. And so let me kind of go through the layout here. We have the bridge headquarters. We have the warehouse down here in the dock area. We have, going straight up Broad Street, we have the commander's headquarters. We have the church where the horses were. And we have the fort. And if you build the fort out to where it would have been with its outer works, it would have blocked Duke Street and Broad Street. That's the hospital. That's poor Isaac's house. This is Esther Alston / Marion's house. This is the house of the sister of Mary Esther Ladeau, who eventually marries the general. This is the house of Gabriel Marion, townhouse, and here's where the Gilliards live. This is the Marion's block. I mean, there's no way of looking at it any other way. If Francis Marion had a hometown street or a corner to come on, that was it. I think what's interesting about this, it really shows you that the British, this was the heart of their fortification in this area. Over here again is the French plantation. What's also interesting is Marion's niece had a pretty good view of the muster ground, a pretty good view of the fort, and a pretty good view of the commander's house. We also have Isaac over here, who basically has the same view. Now, we talked about Marion having a very good, prior speaker, but a very good idea was going on the fort, and his scout, Bob James, who said that, how did you get your information on the fort? I climbed a big tree. Well, that's where the tree was. We tracked that down. So he was able to look from there over and see what was going on in the bridge fort. So that was basically what was going on in Georgetown. Any questions?
Thank you, Karen. Any questions? The artist who did the restricted, that's
It's John Blake White.
John Blake White.
And there's a copy of that portrait owned by the DuPont family. There's a copy of that portrait, or that painting, in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. There's a copy of the painting at the Caroliniana Library. There's a copy of the painting in the United States Senate. They're all slightly different, but they're all the same. Any other questions?
Great.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, that was a great presentation. Yes, ma'am. So with Sergeant Allison Dowell, I read in parts of Mason Line in his book that he was a son of the General Donald McDonald at Morris Creek Bridge. Is that true? Is there evidence for that?
I don't know. I can say that my understanding from what I have read, and this of course is just kind of so-and-so said so-and-so said so-and-so, that McDonald had been, when Marion freed the Continental soldiers from Maryland and Delaware after the Battle of Camden, he freed 150 soldiers. 50 demanded to be able to go on to Charlestown to be prisoners of war because they said they hadn't been warm and hadn't been fed in months since it was the first time. 50 said that they would go back, and they marched back up north, and most of them never arrived. They just kind of deserted. And of the whole group, 3 agreed to join Marion, and one of them was Sergeant Allen McDonald. So whether he had some other connection, I don't know, but he came out of that group of Continentals, and he did not survive the war. He was killed and a rather useless, he became infatuated with a lady in South Carolina, and there was some British doing not much of anything in her front yard, and he had to show off, and he was killed, which is unfortunate. But he was a very brave soldier, a very noted soldier, and he was from that band of
Let me
Continental.
tell you what $5 means to my,
Oh, God.
So you said he was, I thought he was killed, I thought Sergeant Adam Brown was killed at the Battle of Fort Mott, but, so you said there's evidence that he wasn't killed?
It wasn't specifically, there was no particular battle at Fort Mott, really. It was a siege, and I don't think Marion had any casualties, I don't believe. And the fight that I'm talking about could have taken place in the area of Fort Mott. I don't remember just exactly where it was. But again, now I'm getting this out of somebody's memory of the war 50 years later.
Yeah, that's a question.
Karen, is this going to be published in an article that we can find it?
I don't.
It's actually going to be published in a guide that you can use to drive around with, both physical and on your phone.
So the guide actually will have three parts. One is a narration, a general telling the story. One is a guide around the town of Georgetown, a walking guide, and it takes you to places. Most of the places aren't there anymore, but some of them are. And then a driving guide that will take you out to where McDonald's, Gainey, and where Gagomir was killed, and a couple of other areas. Take you down to Fort William, very pretty down there, by the way, and out to the bridge over the Santee again, which is just a beautiful area to go and look.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Last chance for. Yep. Thank you, Karen. Last call for anything in the back, so.